Hey guys, imagine waking up before dawn every single day to work next to a brick oven that's hotter than any sauna you've ever been in, all while your robe clings to you like a wet towel that's been left in a gym bag for a week. You're a Roman cook, and your job is to prepare elaborate feasts for people who wouldn't even look at you if you passed them in the street. The kitchen smells of fish sauce so strong it makes your eyes water, and there's a layer of grease on every surface that's thicker than the coating on a fast food fryer. Your hands are covered in burns from grabbing hot pots, your back aches from stirring massive cauldrons, and somewhere behind you, a rat the size of a cat is eyeing up the bread you just baked. If you think your office job is tough, try spending 12 hours in a smoke-filled room where the temperature never drops below roasting, and your boss might have you beaten if the pork roast isn't seasoned properly. If you're enjoying this, hit that like button and subscribe. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there, because I'm genuinely curious to know where you all are. So let's step into the world of a Roman cook and see why you absolutely wouldn't survive the heat. Your day starts when it's still pitch black outside. No alarm clock, no snooze button, just the rough shake of the head servant who drags you out of your straw mattress. The mattress itself is about as comfortable as sleeping on a pile of old newspapers, and it crackles every time you move. You share a cramped room with 3 other grown servants, and the air in there is thick and musty, like a cupboard that hasn't been opened in months. Someone's feet smell like old cheese, and there's a general fug that settles over everything by morning. You stumble out into the cold courtyard, rubbing your eyes, and the first thing that hits you is the chill. No central heating, no radiator to stand next to, just cold stone under your bare feet and a breeze that cuts right through your thin tunic. You shuffle to the kitchen, which is a separate building, because Romans were terrified of fires spreading to the main house. Smart, really, because your workplace is basically a controlled inferno. The kitchen is already warm from the embers left overnight, but it's not a cozy warm. It's the kind of heat that makes you feel like you're standing too close to a bonfire. You prop open the door to let some air in, but that just means flies start buzzing in immediately, attracted by the smell of yesterday's leftovers. The walls are black with soot, and the ceiling is so stained you can't tell what colour it used to be. There's a layer of grime on the floor that's been trodden into the tiles, and no matter how much you sweep, it never really goes away. Your first job is to get the fire going properly. You crouch down in front of the big brick oven, blowing on the embers and adding dry wood. Smoke billows out and goes straight into your face. Your eyes sting, your throat burns, and you start coughing like you've just run a marathon in a dust storm. This happens every single morning. You'd think you'd get used to it, but you don't. The smoke has nowhere to go except up through a hole in the roof, but half of it seems to stay in the room, swirling around your head like a personal cloud of misery. By the time the fire is roaring, your face is streaked with ash, and you smell like a bonfire. Not in a nice, nostalgic way, more like someone's been roasting old boots. Now the fun really begins. You haul out the big clay pots and bronze cauldrons, each one heavy enough to make your shoulders ache. Romans love their elaborate meals, and that means you're cooking about 7 different dishes for the main banquet tonight. No microwaves, no stoves with dials you can turn. Just fire, and your ability to judge whether something's too hot or not hot enough. You fill a cauldron with water from the courtyard well, which means lugging a heavy clay jug back and forth about 6 times. Your arms are burning by the 3rd trip, and your lower back starts to complain. The well water is cold, but by the time you've hauled it inside, you're anything but. Sweat is already forming on your forehead, and it's not even mid-morning yet. The head cook, a stern man with a permanent scowl, barks instructions at you. He's one of those people who never seems to be pleased with anything. You could serve him a perfectly roasted pig on a golden platter, and he'd complain that the crackling wasn't crispy enough. He's been doing this job for 20 years, and he treats the kitchen like his personal kingdom. You're just a lowly cook, somewhere in the middle of the hierarchy. Below you are the scullery workers who scrub the pots, and above you is the head cook, and maybe one or two specialty cooks who only handle the fancy stuff like pastries or sauces. You do the bulk of the work, roasting, boiling, chopping, stirring, and trying not to burn yourself. Speaking of burning, let's talk about your hands. They're a mess. You've got calluses on your palms from gripping hot pot handles with nothing but a rag for protection. The rag is never thick enough. You've got little scorch marks on your fingers from the times you misjudged the heat and grabbed something too quickly. There's a permanent redness on the side of your hand where you accidentally brushed against the oven door last week. It still stings when you touch it. And your nails? Forget about it. They're cracked, dirty, and no amount of scrubbing gets the grime out from under them. You're constantly handling food, and there's no soap that works well enough to make your hands look even halfway clean. Let's talk about what you're actually cooking. Romans were obsessed with a condiment called garum. It's fermented fish sauce, and it goes in absolutely everything. Imagine the strongest, saltiest, fishiest smell you've ever encountered, then multiply it by 10. That's garum. It comes in big clay jars, and when you open one, the stench hits you like a wave. It's pungent, it's overpowering, and it lingers in your nose for hours. You pour it into dishes, you mix it with wine and herbs, you drizzle it over vegetables. The Romans thought it was the height of flavour. You think it smells like a fish market on a hot day after the refrigeration has failed. But you can't say that, because if the master's food doesn't taste right, you're the one who gets in trouble. Today's menu includes a roasted hare, a dish of stewed lentils with leeks, some sort of spiced sausage, a platter of eggs in a creamy sauce, a salad with roux and rocket, honey cakes, and a whole roasted fish. The fish arrived this morning, still stiff and staring at you with cloudy eyes. You're supposed to gut it, scale it, and stuff it with herbs. Gutting a fish is not a pleasant job at the best of times, but when you're doing it in a hot kitchen with no running water nearby, it's even worse. You slice it open, and the insides slide out onto the wooden table. The smell is strong and briny, and bits of it stick to your fingers. You wipe your hands on your tunic because there's no other option, and now your tunic has a fishy smear on it. Great. That's going to smell lovely for the rest of the day. You stuff the fish with fennel, coriander, and a bit of garum, because of course you do. Then you wrap it in fig leaves and set it on a metal rack over the fire. The fish starts to sizzle and the smell changes from raw and briny to something almost appetizing. Almost. The fig leaves char and smoke, adding another layer to the already thick air in the kitchen. You wipe your forehead with the back of your hand and it comes away grey with ash. You're not even halfway through the morning, and you already look like you've been dragged through a hedge backwards. The lentils are next. You pour them into a pot with water, add some salt, garum, obviously, and a bunch of leeks that you chopped earlier. Chopping leeks is a tearful experience. Not because you're sad, but because they release a sharp, oniony juice that makes your eyes water. You blink furiously, trying to see what you're doing, and inevitably you end up wiping your eyes with your fishy, ashy hands. Now your eyes sting even more. You learn pretty quickly not to touch your face in this job, but it's hard to remember when you're tired and everything itches. Let's talk about the actual ingredients you're working with, because freshness is a relative term in ancient Rome. The meat arrives in varying states of quality. Sometimes it's fresh from the butcher, still faintly warm and smelling of iron. Other times it's been sitting around for a day or two, and it's starting to develop a certain tang. There's no refrigeration, obviously. The best you can do is keep things in a cool cellar or cover them with salt. The fish you're roasting today was probably caught yesterday, which isn't too bad, but the hair has been hanging in the larder for 3 days to tenderize. Hanging meat is a real technique, but it does mean the smell in the larder is ripe. You walk in there to fetch ingredients, and the air is thick and gamey. It's not quite rotting, but it's definitely on its way. Vegetables are a bit more reliable, but they come covered in dirt. Proper dirt, not the light dusting you get on supermarket carrots. We're talking clumps of mud, the occasional worm, and a general layer of grime that takes serious scrubbing to remove. You stand at a basin of water, scrubbing leeks and turnips and beets until your fingers are numb from the cold water. The mud gets under your nails, and you end up with dark crescents that make it look like you've been digging graves. The herbs are fresh at least, and they smell wonderful compared to everything else. A bunch of coriander or mint is like a brief holiday for your nose in the middle of all the other pongs. The eggs come from the household chickens, and collecting them is a job that sometimes falls to you. The chickens live in a coop in the courtyard, and they're not the friendly, docile birds you might imagine. They're scrappy and suspicious, and they peck at your hands if you're not careful. The coop smells of droppings and old straw, a warm, musty farmyard stench that clings to your clothes. You reach under the hens, hoping they don't decide to protest, and pull out warm eggs. Sometimes the eggs are clean, sometimes they're not. You wipe them on your tunic and hope for the best. Cracking an egg is always a gamble. Most of the time it's fine, but every now and then you get one that's off, and the smell is unmistakable. It's a sulphurous, rotten pong that makes you gag. You toss it aside quickly and hope the next one is better. Now let's talk about the honey cakes, because Romans loved their sweets. Honey is the main sweetener, and it comes in big clay jars. It's thick, sticky, and gets absolutely everywhere. You dip a spoon in to measure some out, and by the time you're done, your fingers are coated in a thin layer of stickiness. Honey is a magnet for every bit of dust, ash and grime in the kitchen. Within minutes, your hands look like they've been dipped in glue and rolled in dirt. You try to wipe them on a cloth, but the cloth just gets sticky too. Eventually you give up and accept that you're going to be sticky for the rest of the day. The cake batter is a mixture of flour, honey, eggs and a bit of olive oil. You mix it in a big clay bowl, stirring with a wooden spoon that's older than you are. The spoon is stained and slightly splintered, and you have to be careful not to get a splinter in your hand while you stir. The batter is thick and heavy, and your arm gets tired from the constant circular motion. You pour the batter into shallow pans and set them on a rack over the coals. Baking without an oven thermometer is an art form. Too hot, and the cakes burn on the outside while staying raw in the middle. Too cool, and they take forever and come out dense and chewy. You have to judge by smell, by sight, and by experience. You crouch down next to the fire, watching the cakes, and the heat is so intense it feels like your eyebrows might singe off. While the cakes are baking, you start on the egg dish. This involves making a sauce with eggs, wine, honey and garum. Yes, garum again. It's in everything. You crack the eggs into a bowl, whisk them with a fork, and then slowly heat them in a pan over a low flame. The trick is to stir constantly so they don't scramble. Your wrist aches from the repetitive motion, and your face is so close to the pan that you can feel the steam rising. The sauce thickens slowly, and you add a splash of wine to loosen it. The wine smells sharp and vinegary. Romans didn't drink wine the way we do. They mixed it with water, and the stuff they used for cooking was often quite acidic. It's not a pleasant smell, especially combined with the garum. The kitchen is now a symphony of different stenches. There's the fishy reek of garum, the smoky char of the fire, the gamey tang of the hanging meat, the musty warmth of the chicken coop still clinging to your tunic, and the sweet, slightly burnt smell of the honey cakes. It's overwhelming, and there's no escape. You can't just step outside for a breather because there's too much to do. If you leave something unattended for even a minute, it burns or boils over, and then you're in trouble. Let's talk about the tools you're using. Everything is heavy. The pots are clay or bronze and they weigh a ton. Lifting a full cauldron off the fire requires 2 people and a lot of grunting. There are no pot holders, just rags that are perpetually damp and not very effective. You grab a hot handle through a rag, and you can still feel the heat seeping through. Your grip has to be firm because if you drop a pot, you're not just losing the food, you're probably breaking an expensive piece of equipment and possibly injuring yourself. The knives are iron, and they're not particularly sharp. You have to use a whetstone to sharpen them regularly, and even then, they're not as effective as a modern knife. Chopping through a turnip requires actual effort. You press down hard, rocking the blade, and your knuckles are white from the strain. The graters are even worse. If you need to grate cheese, you use a metal grater that's basically a flat piece of bronze with holes punched in it. It's crude and inefficient, and your knuckles are constantly in danger of scraping against the metal. You've got scabs on your knuckles from previous grating incidents, and they keep getting knocked and reopened. It stings, but there's no time to fuss about it. You just keep grating, trying to angle your hand so you don't add more injuries to the collection. The serving dishes are another headache. The master wants everything presented beautifully, which means you have to arrange the food on platters in an aesthetically pleasing way. This is harder than it sounds when you're exhausted, covered in grime and working in a room full of smoke. You carefully place the roasted fish on a large platter, surround it with herbs and drizzle it with a bit of olive oil to make it glisten. The oil comes from a big clay jar, and you pour it slowly, trying not to add too much. Olive oil is expensive, and if you waste it, the head cook will have your hide. The hare gets arranged on another platter, garnished with more herbs and a few dried fruits for colour. It actually looks quite impressive in a rustic, ancient sort of way. But here's the thing, you're not going to eat any of this. All this effort, all this heat and smoke and burnt fingers, and the food is for the master and his guests. You'll get leftovers if you're lucky. Maybe some of the lentils that got a bit burnt on the bottom of the pot, or a chunk of bread that's too stale for the banquet. Your own meals are simple and repetitive. Porridge in the morning, bread and onions at midday, maybe some beans or lentils in the evening if there's anything spare. It's filling, but it's dull. You dream about the roasted meats and honey cakes, but they're not for you. You're just the person who makes them, standing in the smoke and the heat, while other people enjoy the fruits of your labour. Let's talk about water, because it's one of those things you take completely for granted in modern life. You turn on a tap and clean water comes out. Simple. In a Roman kitchen, water is a precious resource that requires effort. The household has a well in the courtyard, and every drop of water you use has to be hauled up in a bucket. The bucket is heavy when it's full, and the rope is rough on your hands. You develop calluses on your palms from pulling the rope, and they crack and sting when you wash your hands in cold water. You need water for everything: cooking, cleaning, washing vegetables, and occasionally washing yourself. But you don't get to use it freely. Every jug you fill is a jug someone has to haul up, and if you waste water, you'll hear about it. Washing dishes is a nightmare. There's no sink with hot running water, no detergent that cuts through grease. You have a big basin of cold water, maybe with a bit of ash or sand mixed in to help scrub. Ash is mildly abrasive and helps break down grease, but it also dries out your hands something awful. You scrub the pots and platters with a rough cloth, and your hands are red and raw by the end of it. The grease doesn't come off easily. It clings to the bronze and clay, and you have to scrub hard, using your fingernails to pick at the stubborn bits. The water in the basin quickly becomes murky and scummy, and you have to change it several times. That means more trips to the well, more hauling, more aching arms. Your hands are constantly wet or sticky or covered in something unpleasant. There's no hand cream, no moisturizer to soothe the dryness. Your skin cracks, especially in the winter, and the cracks sting when you handle anything acidic like vinegar or wine. You develop a kind of resigned toughness. You just accept that your hands are going to hurt, and you keep working. Complaining doesn't help. Everyone else in the kitchen is in the same boat, and nobody has time for whinging. Let's talk about the smell of the place in more detail, because it's truly something special. The base note is smoke, always smoke. It permeates everything. Your hair smells of smoke, your clothes smell of smoke, even your skin seems to absorb it. On top of that, there's the layered aroma of whatever you've been cooking that day. Fish, roasted meat, onions, garlic, leeks, and the ever-present garum. The garum is the worst. It's so strong and so pervasive that you can taste it in the air. It gets into your throat and sits there, a constant reminder of what you've been working with. When you finally leave the kitchen at the end of the day, you carry the smell with you. People can tell you're a cook just by standing near you. There's also the underlying mustiness of the room itself. The kitchen is damp in the winter because there's condensation from all the boiling pots, and the walls never fully dry out. In the summer, it's stifling and airless, and the heat makes all the smells stronger. The floor is perpetually greasy despite your efforts to sweep and scrub it. Bits of food get trodden into the cracks between the tiles, and they sit there slowly decomposing. There's a faint, sour smell that you can never quite locate or eliminate. It's just part of the kitchen's character, like the soot on the ceiling and the scorch marks on the walls. Now let's talk about the actual process of roasting meat, because it's more complicated than just sticking something in the oven. Romans loved their roasted meats, and they expected them to be cooked perfectly. You use a metal spit, a long rod that you skewer the meat onto. The hair, for example, has to be trussed carefully so it doesn't fall apart while it's turning. You tie it with twine, securing the legs and body, and then you slide it onto the spit. The spit sits on two metal supports over the fire, and you have to turn it regularly to make sure the meat cooks evenly. This is a hands-on job. You can't just set a timer and walk away. You stand there, turning the spit, watching the meat brown, feeling the heat on your face and arms. Turning a spit is exhausting. Your arms and shoulders burn from the repetitive motion, and you have to stay focused. If you stop turning, one side burns while the other stays raw. The fat drips off the meat into the fire, causing flare-ups. You learn to anticipate them and pull the spit back slightly when the flames jump, but sometimes you're too slow, and a flare singes the meat, or worse, your arm. You smell burning hair again and curse under your breath. The head cook glances over, and you quickly get back to turning, pretending everything's fine. The smell of roasting meat is actually quite nice, especially compared to some of the other things you deal with. It's rich and savoury, and your stomach rumbles. You haven't eaten since your small breakfast of porridge hours ago, and the smell is torture. You're surrounded by food all day, but you can't just sneak a bite. The portions are carefully measured, and if something goes missing, you'll be blamed. So you stand there hungry, turning a spit of meat that you'll never taste, and you try not to think about it. Let's talk about the herbs and spices, because Romans were quite adventurous with their flavourings. You use things like cumin, coriander, pepper, fennel, rue, and lovage. Some of them smell wonderful. Fennel is sweet and aniseed-like, and coriander is fresh and citrusy. But then there's rue, which is bitter and pungent, and lovage, which has a strong, celery-like aroma that's not to everyone's taste. You chop these herbs on a wooden board that's stained and scarred from years of use. The board has a permanent smell of onions and garlic, no matter how much you scrub it. Garlic is another staple. You peel cloves by the dozen, and your fingers reek of it. The smell is so strong it seems to seep into your skin. You can wash your hands 10 times and you'll still smell garlic. It's not unpleasant exactly, but it's overwhelming. You crush the garlic with the flat of your knife and the juice gets on your hands. If you accidentally touch your face, your eyes sting. If you have any small cuts or cracks in your skin, the garlic juice gets in and burns. It's a sharp, intense pain that makes you hiss through your teeth. Pepper is a luxury item, expensive and imported from far away. You use it sparingly, grinding it in a small mortar with a pestle. The grinding releases a sharp, spicy aroma that makes your nose tingle. If you breathe in at the wrong moment, you inhale a bit of pepper dust and start sneezing uncontrollably. Your eyes water, your nose runs, and you have to step away from the table to recover. The other cooks find this hilarious. You don't. The honey cakes are finally done, and you pull them off the fire. They're golden brown and smell sweet and slightly burnt around the edges. You drizzle them with more honey while they're still warm, and the honey soaks in, making them sticky and glossy. They look delicious, and your mouth waters. But again, not for you. You set them aside to cool and move on to the next task. The salad is a simple affair. Rocket, lettuce and roux, dressed with vinegar, olive oil and a pinch of salt. You wash the leaves in cold water, shaking them dry. The roux has a strong, bitter smell that's quite distinctive. It's meant to aid digestion, apparently, but mostly it just tastes unpleasant. You arrange the leaves on a platter, drizzle the dressing over them, and that's that. Salads are one of the easier tasks, and you're grateful for the brief respite. The lentils are bubbling away in their pot, and you give them a stir. They're soft and starting to break down, which is what you want. You taste a spoonful to check the seasoning, blowing on it first because it's scalding hot. It's salty, thanks to the garum, and the leeks add a mild sweetness. It's actually not bad, and you feel a small sense of satisfaction. This is one dish you might actually get to eat later, assuming there's any left. Let's talk about the dining room, which you rarely see but which dictates your entire day. The master and his guests recline on couches eating and drinking for hours. They're entertained by musicians and sometimes dancers. They talk, they laugh, they gorge themselves on the food you've spent all day preparing. Meanwhile, you're still in the kitchen, keeping the fire going, preparing the next course, and cleaning up the mess from the previous one. Roman banquets can have multiple courses, sometimes 7 or more, and each one requires fresh preparation. It's relentless. The guests might send a dish back if they don't like it. Maybe the sauce is too salty, or the meat is too tough, or the flavours aren't balanced. The waiter brings it back to the kitchen, and the head cook erupts. He yells at whoever made the dish, and that might be you. You have to quickly fix it or make something else, all while the other dishes are still cooking. The pressure is intense and mistakes are not tolerated. You work faster, your hands shaking slightly from the stress and the heat and the sheer exhaustion. Let's talk about the heat in more detail, because it's one of the most relentless aspects of the job. The kitchen is hot all year round, but in the summer, it's almost unbearable. The fire has to be kept burning for hours, and there's no air conditioning, no fans, no ice. The air is thick and heavy, and it feels like you're breathing soup. Sweat drips down your face, stings your eyes, and soaks your tunic. The fabric clings to your back and chest, and it chafes with every movement. You develop a rash under your arms and around your waist where the tunic rubs. It's itchy and uncomfortable, but there's nothing you can do about it except try to ignore it. Your feet are another source of misery. You're standing on hard tile for 12 or more hours a day. The Romans didn't have cushioned shoes or supportive sandals. You wear basic leather sandals that offer no arch support and not much protection. The soles are thin, and you can feel every bump and crack in the floor. By midday, your feet are aching. By evening, they're throbbing. You shift your weight from foot to foot, trying to ease the pain, but it doesn't help much. When you finally sit down at the end of the day, your feet are swollen and covered in blisters. The blisters rub against the leather straps of your sandals, and the next day, the cycle starts all over again. Let's talk about the other people in the kitchen, because you're not working alone. There are other cooks, scullery workers, and occasionally the steward who oversees the household staff. The steward is a self-important man who likes to stride into the kitchen and point out problems. He'll inspect the platters, sniff the food, and make critical comments. He doesn't actually cook anything himself, but he's in charge, so you have to listen to him. He might complain that the fish isn't garnished elaborately enough, or that the honey cakes are too small. You bite your tongue and nod, because arguing with the steward is a sure way to make your life even more difficult. The other cooks are a mixed bunch. Some are friendly and helpful, and you work together in a kind of tired camaraderie. Others are competitive and territorial, guarding their recipes and techniques like state secrets. There's one older cook who's been in the household for decades, and he thinks he knows everything. He's constantly offering unsolicited advice, telling you you're stirring the pot wrong or adding too much garum. You smile politely and try to tune him out, but it's grating. The scullery workers are at the bottom of the hierarchy, and they have it even worse than you. They spend all day scrubbing pots and hauling water, and they're constantly being bossed around by everyone else. There's a kind of gallows humour that develops among the kitchen staff. You make jokes about the master's ridiculous demands, or the time someone accidentally spilled garum all over the steward's shoes, or the waiter who tripped and nearly dropped a platter of roasted dormice in the master's lap. The jokes aren't particularly funny, but they help. They're a way of coping with the exhaustion and the stress and the relentless, grinding nature of the work. Let's talk about the end of the day, because that's when you realize just how wrecked you are. The banquet finally finishes, and the waiters bring back the platters. Some are empty, which is gratifying. Others still have food on them, which is frustrating because it means all the effort was for nothing. You and the other cooks fall on the leftovers like starving wolves. You grab a piece of bread, scoop up some lentils, maybe sneak a bit of the roasted hare if the head cook isn't looking. It's cold by now, and the fat has congealed, but you don't care. You're ravenous. You eat standing up, shoveling the food into your mouth, barely tasting it. The cleanup is the final insult. The platters and pots are all dirty, and they need to be scrubbed before you can go to bed. You fill the basin with water, add some ash, and start scrubbing. Your hands are already raw, and the ash stings. You're so tired you can barely stand, but you keep going because there's no choice. The head cook supervises, making sure nothing is left dirty. He's a stickler for cleanliness, which is ironic given that the kitchen itself is permanently grubby. Finally, mercifully, you're done. You stumble out of the kitchen into the cool night air, and it feels like a blessing. The temperature has dropped, and the breeze is blissfully cold against your hot skin. You're filthy, exhausted, and aching in places you didn't know could ache. You head to the courtyard well and splash some cold water on your face and hands. It's shockingly cold, and it wakes you up a bit. You drink a few handfuls because you're desperately thirsty. You've been so busy all day that you haven't had time to drink properly, and your throat is dry and scratchy from the smoke. You shuffle back to your tiny room, where your straw mattress is waiting. You don't bother changing out of your tunic, because you don't have another one. You just collapse onto the mattress and it crackles under your weight. You're asleep within seconds, but it's not a restful sleep. Your back aches, your feet throb, and your hands sting. You dream about smoke and fire and garum, and then the head servant is shaking you awake again, and it's time to start all over. Let's talk about the physical toll this job takes on your body over time. Your lungs suffer from breathing in smoke every single day. You develop a chronic cough that never really goes away. It's a dry, hacking cough that gets worse at night. Your eyes are constantly irritated from the smoke, and they water frequently. You squint a lot, which gives you lines around your eyes even though you're not that old. Your hands are a disaster. The burns, the calluses, the cracks, the constant exposure to heat and cold and harsh cleaning agents. They age faster than the rest of you. Your back is another casualty. All the lifting, the bending, the standing. You develop a persistent ache in your lower back that never fully goes away. Some days it's worse than others, and you move like an old man, stiff and careful. Your hearing is affected too, because the kitchen is a noisy place. Pots clanging, the fire roaring, people shouting instructions, the sizzle and crackle of cooking food. It's a constant din, and over time your ears become a bit dull. You have to ask people to repeat themselves, and you miss the quieter sounds. Your sense of smell is both heightened and deadened. You can detect subtle differences in cooking aromas, which is useful, but the constant exposure to strong smells like garum and smoke means you become a bit nose blind to them. You don't notice how much you reek until someone from outside the kitchen wrinkles their nose when you pass by. Let's talk about the seasonal changes, because they affect your work in different ways. In the winter, the kitchen is one of the few warm places in the household, which sounds nice until you realise it just means everyone wants to crowd in there. The scullery workers linger by the fire, the steward makes more frequent inspections just to warm up, and you have even less space to work. The fire needs constant feeding because the wood burns faster in the cold, and you're constantly hauling logs from the wood pile. The wood pile is outside, of course, and it's often damp. Damp wood smokes horribly and doesn't burn well, so you spend even more time coaxing the fire and breathing in even more smoke. The ingredients change with the seasons too. In the winter, fresh vegetables are scarce, and you rely more on stored grains, dried beans, and preserved meats. The preserved meats are heavily salted and need to be soaked before cooking, or they're inedibly salty. You put chunks of salt pork in a basin of water and leave them overnight. By morning, the water is cloudy and scummy, and the pork smells strongly of salt and brine. You drain it, rinse it, and then boil it for hours to make it tender. It's a lot of work for a fairly mediocre result, but it's what you have. In the summer, fresh produce is abundant, which is a relief. You get lovely ripe tomatoes, cucumbers, melons, and berries. But the heat is oppressive, and food spoils quickly. You have to be vigilant about checking ingredients, because something that was fine in the morning might be buzzing with flies by the afternoon. The flies are a constant menace. They land on everything, and you're constantly waving them away. You cover dishes with cloths, but the flies still find a way in. You develop a kind of automatic swatting reflex, and you kill dozens of them a day, but more always arrive. The outdoor market is where many of the ingredients come from, and sometimes you're sent there to buy supplies. This is both a break from the kitchen and a whole different kind of ordeal. The market is crowded, noisy, and chaotic. Vendors shout, customers haggle, animals bleat and cluck in pens. The smell is a mixture of fresh produce, livestock, and humanity. It's pungent and overwhelming, especially on a hot day. You navigate through the throng, clutching a list and a small pouch of coins. You have to be careful, because if you lose the money or get shortchanged, it comes out of your hide. Haggling is expected, and you're not very good at it. The vendors can spot a tired, inexperienced cook from a mile away, and they try to overcharge you. You argue half-heartedly, too exhausted to really put up a fight. You end up paying a bit more than you should, and you hope the steward doesn't notice. You buy onions, leeks, a basket of apples, some fresh fish, and a live chicken. The chicken is stuffed into a woven basket, and it squawks indignantly. You carry the basket under one arm, and it's awkward and heavy. The chicken pecks at the weave, and you can feel its beak occasionally jabbing your side. The walk back to the household is hot and tiring. The sun beats down, and you're carrying heavy baskets. Your shoulders ache, and the chicken is making a racket. You pass other people on the street, and they give you a wide berth because you smell of smoke and sweat and fish. You're very aware of your low status. Free citizens look through you as if you're invisible. Other servants give you brief nods of solidarity. You finally reach the household gates, and it's almost a relief to be back in the familiar smoky confines of the kitchen. Let's talk about the implements and utensils in more detail, because they're all quite primitive by modern standards. The knives, as mentioned, are iron and not very sharp. They rust easily if you don't dry them properly, and rust gets on your hands and stains them orange. The cutting boards are wood, scarred and stained from years of use. You have to be careful not to cut yourself, because the dull knives require more pressure, and if they slip, you can give yourself a nasty gash. The pots and pans are heavy bronze or clay. Bronze conducts heat well, but it also gets incredibly hot. You need a thick cloth to handle bronze cookware, and even then, you often burn your fingers. Clay pots are more forgiving in some ways, but they're fragile. Drop one, and it shatters. You've seen it happen, and the cook responsible got a severe tongue lashing from the head cook. Clay pots also develop cracks over time, and they start to leak. You have to check them regularly and retire the ones that are too damaged. The mortar and pestle are essential tools. You use them to grind spices, crush garlic, and make pastes. The mortar is heavy stone, and the pestle is a rounded stone that fits in your hand. Grinding is hard work. You have to press down and twist, using your whole arm. Your wrist and forearm ache after grinding a large batch of spices. The motion is repetitive and tedious, and your mind wanders. You think about how nice it would be to be anywhere else, doing anything else. The strainers are made of woven reeds or metal mesh, and they're not very effective. You pour a pot of boiled vegetables through a strainer, and half the water stays in the pot, mixed with the vegetables. You have to shake and tilt and coax the water through, and it takes forever. The metal strainers rust, and bits of rust flake off into the food. You pick them out as best you can, but you probably miss some. Nobody seems to get sick from it, so you assume it's fine. Let's talk about the bread, because bread is a staple of the Roman diet, and making it is a whole process. The household has a bread oven separate from the main cooking fire. It's a big domed brick structure that needs to be heated for hours before you can bake in it. You light a fire inside the oven and let it burn until the bricks are scorching hot. Then you rake out the embers, wipe the floor of the oven with a damp cloth on a stick, and slide the loaves in. The heat radiates from the bricks, and the bread bakes in that retained heat. Preparing the dough is labor-intensive. You mix flour, water, salt, and a bit of leaven in a big clay bowl. The flour is coarse and gritty, and it takes a lot of kneading to develop the dough. You knead for what feels like hours, pressing and folding, pressing and folding. Your arms ache, and your hands are covered in sticky dough. When the dough is finally smooth and elastic, You shape it into loaves and set them aside to rise. Rising takes time, and you have to judge when they're ready. Too soon, and the bread is dense. Too late, and it collapses. Sliding the loaves into the oven is tricky. You use a long wooden peel, a flat paddle on a long handle. You dust the peel with flour, place a loaf on it, and then slide it into the oven with a quick shove. The heat that rolls out of the oven is intense, and your face feels like it's going to melt. You work quickly, sliding in loaf after loaf, and then you shut the oven door and wait. The smell of baking bread is wonderful, rich and yeasty and comforting. It's one of the few genuinely pleasant smells in the kitchen. When the bread is done, you pull the loaves out with the peel. They're golden brown and crusty, and they thump satisfyingly when you tap the bottom. You set them on a rack to cool, and the crust crackles as it cools. You're allowed to eat the bread that doesn't meet the standard for the master's table, maybe a loaf that's a bit misshapen or over-browned. You tear off a chunk, and it's still warm. The crust is crisp, and the inside is soft and chewy. It's delicious, and for a moment, you almost forget how miserable you are. Let's talk about wine, because Romans drank a lot of it, and you're involved in its preparation. Wine is stored in big clay amphorae, and it's often quite strong and acidic. The Romans didn't drink it straight. They mixed it with water, sometimes with honey or spices. They also heated it in the winter, making a kind of mulled wine. You're responsible for preparing the wine for the banquet, which means mixing it in big jugs and adding whatever flavourings the master prefers. Let's talk about the social isolation of the job, because it's something that wears on you. You spend all day in the kitchen with the same handful of people, and you rarely interact with anyone else. The household is large, and there are other servants doing other jobs, but you don't really see them. The master and his family are distant figures. You catch glimpses of them occasionally, but they don't acknowledge you. You're furniture to them, part of the background. Your friendships are limited to the other kitchen staff, and those relationships are complicated by the hierarchy and the stress. You might share a joke with one of the scullery workers, but you can't really be friends because you're above them in rank, and fraternizing too much might be seen as undermining the order. The head cook is too far above you to be a friend, and anyway, he's a grumpy sod who rarely smiles. So you're lonely, even though you're surrounded by people all day. There's no privacy either. You share a room with 3 other grown servants, and you can hear every snore, every cough, every rustle of straw. The room is tiny, barely big enough for the 4 mattresses. There's no space for personal belongings. Not that you have many. You own the tunic you're wearing, a spare one that's even more threadbare, and maybe a small pouch with a few coins you've managed to save. That's it. That's your entire worldly wealth. Let's talk about laundry, because your tunic gets filthy and washing it is another chore. There's no washing machine, no easy detergent. You take your tunic to the courtyard, fill a basin with water, and scrub it with a bar of harsh soap. The soap is made from animal fat and ash, and it's not very effective. It strips some of the dirt and grease, but it never gets your tunic really clean. The fabric is rough and worn, and scrubbing it too hard will tear it. You wring it out and hang it on a line to dry, which takes hours. In the meantime, you wear your spare tunic, which is even worse. The soap is harsh on your skin, and your hands feel dry and tight after washing. There's no moisturizer, no lotion. You just endure the dryness and hope your skin doesn't crack too badly. In the winter, your hands chap and bleed, and it's painful. You wrap them in rags sometimes, but that makes it hard to work, so mostly you just suffer. Let's talk about illness, because you're going to get sick, and there's no sick leave. If you have a cold, you still have to work. You stand in the kitchen, sneezing and coughing, and you try to keep it away from the food, but it's not easy. Your nose runs constantly and you wipe it on your sleeve. Everyone else in the kitchen gets sick too because it's impossible to avoid in such close quarters. You all trudge through feeling miserable, and eventually the cold passes. If you get something more serious like a fever or a stomach ailment, you're in real trouble. You might be allowed to lie down for a day or two, but if it goes on longer, the master might decide you're not worth keeping. Enslaved workers can be sold, and freedmen can be turned out. There's no safety net, no health care. You either recover or you don't. The fear of serious illness is constant, a low-level anxiety that you carry with you. Let's talk about the pests, because the kitchen is full of them. Rats and mice are a constant problem. They get into the grain stores, they chew through baskets, and they leave droppings everywhere. You set traps, but you never catch them all. You hear them scurrying around at night, and sometimes you see one dart across the floor in broad daylight. They're bold and clever, and they've learned to avoid the obvious traps. The droppings are a health hazard, and you have to check every ingredient carefully to make sure it hasn't been contaminated. Cockroaches are another joy. They hide in the cracks and crevices during the day and come out at night. You light a lamp and see them scattering, dozens of them, their shiny brown bodies disappearing into the walls. They're disgusting, and there's no effective way to get rid of them. You crush the ones you catch and they make a horrible crunching sound under your sandal. Ants are everywhere in the summer. They form long trails from outside to any source of food. You see a line of ants marching across the floor, up the wall, and into a jar of honey. You pour boiling water on them, and it kills some, but more always come. You move the honey jar, and the ants find it again within a day. It's a losing battle. Let's talk about the constant fear of making a mistake, because the consequences can be severe. If you burn a dish, or add too much salt, or forget an ingredient, the master might be displeased. If he's in a good mood, you might just get a verbal reprimand. If he's in a bad mood, you might be beaten. The head cook has a stick, and he's not afraid to use it. You've felt it across your shoulders more than once, and it hurts. The fear of the stick keeps you focused, even when you're exhausted. There's also the fear of theft accusations. If something goes missing from the kitchen, the servants are the first suspects. Maybe a piece of meat vanishes, or a jar of honey is half empty. The steward interrogates everyone, and if he can't find the culprit, he might punish all of you collectively. It's deeply unfair, but there's nothing you can do about it. You learn to be very careful about where you are and what you're doing, so you can't be falsely accused. Let's talk about the tiny moments of pleasure that keep you going. The smell of fresh bread, the taste of a ripe fig stolen from the garden, the brief coolness of the evening air after a scorching day in the kitchen, a shared laugh with another cook over something ridiculous. These moments are small, but they matter. They're what make the job bearable, just barely. Sometimes the master is pleased with a meal, and he sends word to the kitchen. The head cook might relay a compliment, and you feel a small flush of pride. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's a brief respite from the constant criticism and pressure. You remind yourself that you're skilled at what you do, even if nobody appreciates it most of the time. Let's talk about the lack of control over your own life. You don't get to choose when you wake up, when you eat, when you sleep. You don't get to choose what you cook or how you cook it. Every decision is made by someone else, and you just follow orders. It's dehumanizing, and it grinds you down over time. You start to feel like a machine, just going through the motions, day after day. You fantasize about freedom sometimes, late at night when you can't sleep because your back hurts. If you're enslaved, you dream of being freed, of walking away from the kitchen and never coming back. If you're already a freedman, you dream of saving enough money to start your own small food stall, where you're the boss and you make the decisions. But it's a distant dream, almost impossible. The wages are tiny, and most of what you earn goes to basic necessities. Saving is almost impossible. Let's talk about the physical space of the kitchen in more detail, because it's a character in its own right. The walls are blackened with soot, and no amount of scrubbing will make them clean. The ceiling beams are charred from years of smoke, and they drip with sticky residue. The floor is uneven, with tiles that have cracked and shifted. There are dark stains everywhere, from spilled wine, dropped food, and other things you'd rather not think about. There's a small window, high up on one wall, that lets in a bit of light and air, but it's too small to provide much relief. The door is usually propped open, but that just lets in flies and dust. There's a shelf along one wall where the pots and utensils are stored. It's cluttered and disorganized, and you're always searching for the right implement. Let's talk about the routine, because it never changes and the monotony is soul-crushing. Every day is the same. Wake up before dawn, light the fire, prepare breakfast for the household, clean up, start preparing lunch, clean up, start preparing dinner, clean up, go to bed, repeat. There's no variation, no excitement, no sense of progress. You're stuck in a loop, and there's no escape. The seasons change, the menu changes slightly, but the basic rhythm never does. You mark time by the festivals and public holidays, but they just mean more work, not a break. The years blur together. You lose track of how long you've been doing this job. It feels like forever. Let's talk about the few possessions you have, because they're precious. You have a small wooden comb for your hair. It's missing a few teeth, but it's yours. You have a spare tunic, as mentioned, and a thin blanket for cold nights. You have a small clay lamp that you can light if you need to see in the dark. Oil for the lamp is expensive, so you use it sparingly. You have a wooden bowl and a wooden spoon that you use for your own meals. That's it. Your entire life fits into a small corner of the shared room. You treasure these few things because they're all you have. The comb is useful for getting tangles out of your hair, and more importantly, for removing lice. Everyone has lice. They're a fact of life. You feel them crawling on your scalp, and you scratch constantly. At night, you sit with one of the other servants, and you pick lice out of each other's hair. It's a weirdly intimate and companionable activity. You crack the lice between your thumbnails, and they make a tiny popping sound. It's gross, but it's also satisfying. Your hair is another thing that's perpetually dirty. You can't wash it often because water is scarce, and heating enough for a proper wash is a luxury. So your hair gets greasy and matted. You tie it back with a bit of string to keep it out of your face while you work, but it still manages to get singed occasionally when you lean too close to the fire. You smell the burning hair and curse, patting frantically to make sure it's not actually on fire. Let's talk about the master's expectations, because they're absurdly high. Romans of a certain class were obsessed with food and dining. A successful banquet was a matter of social prestige. The food had to be elaborate, the presentation had to be impressive, and everything had to be perfectly timed. No pressure then. You're expected to produce miracles with limited ingredients, primitive equipment, and not enough time. And if you fail, it's your fault. The master might request a dish you've never made before. He's heard about it at a friend's house, and now he wants it. The head cook has a vague idea of how to make it, and he barks instructions at you. You do your best, improvising and hoping it turns out all right. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. The failures are remembered much longer than the successes. Let's talk about the odd ingredients that sometimes appear. exotic imports from far-flung parts of the empire, spices from the east, unusual fruits, strange cuts of meat. You're handed something you've never seen before and told to incorporate it into a dish. You have no recipe, no guidance, just your instincts and experience. It's stressful, but it's also one of the few interesting parts of the job. You experiment, you taste, you adjust. It's creative in a way that most of your work isn't. One time, a basket of oysters arrives. They're still alive, and they smell of the sea. You've never prepared oysters before. The head cook shows you how to shuck them, sliding a knife into the hinge and twisting. The shell pops open, and inside is the oyster, glistening and grey. It looks unappetizing, but apparently they're a delicacy. You arrange them on a platter with a vinegar and pepper dressing, and you're curious enough to try one yourself when nobody's looking. It's slimy and briny, and you're not sure you like it, but it's different, and different is rare. Let's talk about the noise in the kitchen, because it's relentless. The fire roars and crackles, pots clang and bang, knives chop against wooden boards, people shout instructions and curses, water hisses when it's thrown on hot coals. The whole space is a cacophony, and it's exhausting. You can't hear yourself think, and conversations have to be shouted to be understood. The noise follows you even when you leave the kitchen. Your ears ring in the quiet of the evening, and you hear phantom clangs and crashes. It takes a while for your ears to adjust to silence, and by the time they do, it's time to go back to the kitchen and start again. Let's talk about the rare moments when the kitchen is quiet. Late at night, after everything's cleaned up and everyone else has gone to bed, you sometimes linger for a moment. The fire has died down to embers, and the room is almost peaceful. The silence is eerie after the constant noise of the day. You sit on a stool and just breathe, enjoying the stillness. It's the closest thing you get to solitude. Let's talk about the festivals, because they're a mixed blessing. On one hand, there's a festive atmosphere in the household. On the other hand, you have to prepare enormous quantities of food. A typical banquet becomes a mega banquet. Multiple courses, dozens of dishes, enough to feed the master's extended family and all his guests. You work for days in advance, preparing things that can be made ahead. Pastries, sauces, marinated meats. On the day of the festival, the kitchen is chaos. Every surface is covered with food in various stages of preparation. The fire is blazing, the oven is roaring, and you're running around like a headless chicken. The head cook is barking orders, the steward is hovering and criticizing, and you're trying to keep track of 20 different things at once. It's the most stressful day of the year, and you're relieved when it's finally over. Let's talk about the winter cold, because while the kitchen is warm, the rest of the household is freezing. When you step outside to fetch water or wood, the cold hits you like a slap. Your breath mists in the air, and your fingers go numb within minutes. The courtyard is icy, and you have to watch your step, or you'll slip. The well water is shockingly cold, and your hands ache when you plunge them in to fill the jug. At night, in your unheated room, you huddle under your thin blanket and try to get warm. The straw mattress doesn't provide much insulation, and the cold seeps up from the floor. You curl up in a ball, and your teeth chatter. Sleep is difficult because you're so cold. You wake up stiff and achy, and it takes a while for your body to warm up. Let's talk about the summer heat outside the kitchen. If the kitchen is unbearable, the rest of the world isn't much better. The sun blazes down, and the courtyard is like an oven. The tiles are hot under your feet, and the air shimmers. You squint against the glare, and your head pounds. There's no shade, no relief. You duck back into the kitchen, which is at least familiar, even if it's not any cooler. Let's talk about the oil lamps, because they're the only source of light after dark. They burn olive oil, and the flame is small and smoky. The light is dim and flickering, casting strange shadows on the walls. You have to be careful not to knock one over, because the oil will spill and the flame will spread. You've seen it happen once, and it was terrifying. The flames leapt across the floor, and everyone rushed to smother them with rags and sand. Luckily, it was contained quickly, but it's a reminder of how dangerous the kitchen is. Let's talk about the smells that linger on you permanently. You reek of smoke, always. Your hair smells of it, your clothes smell of it, your skin seems to absorb it. On top of that, there's the fishy tang of garum, the yeasty smell of bread, the oniony sharpness of leeks. You become a walking advertisement for the kitchen. People can tell what you do just by standing near you. Let's talk about the utter lack of any career progression. You're a cook, and you'll probably be a cook for the rest of your life. There's no path to promotion unless the head cook dies or retires, and even then, the master might bring in someone from outside rather than promote from within. You're stuck. This is it. This is your life, and it's not going to get better. The realization is crushing. You're in your 20s or 30s, and you can see the older cooks, the ones who've been doing this for decades. They're hunched and tired, their hands gnarled, their coughs chronic. That's your future. There's no golden retirement, no pension. You work until you can't work anymore, and then you're cast aside. It's bleak, and you try not to think about it too much. Let's talk about the rare visitors to the kitchen. Sometimes a curious guest wanders in, wanting to see where the food is made. The steward usually shoos them out, but occasionally one lingers. They wrinkle their nose at the smell, glance around at the soot and grime, and then leave quickly. You're just part of the scenery to them, not a person worth talking to. It's dehumanizing, and it reinforces your low status. Very occasionally, the master himself comes to the kitchen. It's a big event, and everyone scrambles to look busy and competent. He inspects the ingredients, asks a few questions, and then leaves. You barely dare to breathe while he's there. The head cook does all the talking, and you just keep your head down and hope you don't get noticed. Let's talk about the injuries that are just part of the job. Burns, cuts, scrapes, blisters. You're constantly damaging yourself in small ways. A splash of hot oil hits your arm and leaves a red mark. A knife slips and nicks your finger. You bang your shin on the edge of the table. You develop a thick callus on the side of your foot from where your sandal rubs. None of these injuries is serious enough to stop work, so you just carry on. Over time, your body becomes a map of minor scars and marks. Your joints ache from the repetitive motions. Your wrists are sore from stirring and chopping. Your knees hurt from all the bending and crouching. Your shoulders are tight from lifting heavy pots. You feel older than you are, and you move like someone twice your age. Let's talk about the dreams you have. Not aspirational dreams, but actual sleep dreams. You dream about the kitchen constantly. You dream that you're stirring a pot that never stops boiling, or that you're chopping vegetables that multiply as you cut them. You dream that the head cook is yelling at you, or that the fire has gone out and you can't get it started. Your work follows you into sleep, and you wake up feeling like you haven't rested at all. Occasionally, you have a pleasant dream. You dream that you're somewhere green and cool with fresh air and no smoke. You dream that you're eating a proper meal, something rich and satisfying. But then you wake up, and you're back in your cramped room, and it's time to start another day. Let's talk about the politics among the kitchen staff. There's always tension and jockeying for position. Someone's trying to curry favour with the head cook by working extra hard or by informing on the others. Someone else is resentful because they think they deserve a better position. Alliances form and break, It's petty and exhausting, and you try to stay out of it, but it's impossible to avoid entirely. There's one cook who's particularly unpleasant. He's always making snide comments, always trying to make you look bad. He'll move your ingredients so you can't find them, or he'll tell the head cook that you made a mistake even when you didn't. You hate him, but you can't confront him because that would just make things worse. So you endure his little cruelties and fantasize about revenge you'll never take. Let's talk about the brief interactions you have with the outside world. When you go to the market, or when a tradesman delivers supplies, you get a glimpse of life beyond the household. You see free people going about their business, making choices, living their lives. It's a reminder of what you don't have, and it stings. You see a family walking together, laughing and talking. You see a merchant haggling cheer. Let's talk about the mornings in more brutal detail, because the way you start the day sets the tone for the misery that follows. You're dragged from sleep when it's still completely dark outside, and your body protests immediately. Every muscle is stiff from the previous day's labour, and your joints crack audibly as you sit up. The straw mattress has left impressions in your skin, and you can feel the individual stalks that poked you all night. Your mouth tastes foul, like something died in there, and your throat is dry and scratchy from breathing in smoke residue that's still lingering in your lungs from yesterday. There's no gentle wake-up, no gradual transition to consciousness. The head servant shakes you roughly, and if you're too slow to respond, he kicks the edge of your mattress. The other servants in the room are groaning and shuffling, and the air is thick with the smell of sleep and unwashed bodies. Nobody speaks much in the morning. You're all too tired and too resentful of being awake. You pull on your tunic, which is still damp with yesterday's sweat and stiff with dried grime. It's cold against your skin, and you shiver. Your bladder is full, and you have to shuffle out to the latrine in the dark. The courtyard is freezing, and your bare feet slap against the cold stone. The stars are still out, and the world is eerily quiet. You do your business as quickly as possible, trying not to breathe through your nose because the stench is worse in the confined space. There's no proper light, just a tiny oil lamp that barely illuminates anything. You fumble with the sponge stick, trying not to think about how many other people have used it. Back in the kitchen, the fire from the previous evening has died down to barely glowing embers, and your first job is to coax it back to life. You kneel on the hard floor, and your knees immediately start to ache. The stone is cold and unforgiving. You blow on the embers, and ash flies up into your face. You cough and blink, your eyes watering. You add kindling, small twigs that catch quickly and gradually build up to larger pieces of wood. The fire is temperamental, and sometimes it takes several attempts before it catches properly. All the while, smoke is billowing into your face, and you're coughing and squinting. Once the fire is going, you have to fetch water for the day's cooking. The well is in the courtyard, and the bucket is heavy even when it's empty. You lower it down, hearing the splash as it hits the water far below, and then you haul it back up. The rope is coarse and rough, and it burns your palms even though they're already calloused. You fill a large clay jug and carry it back to the kitchen, and the weight of it makes your shoulders scream. You make this trip multiple times, and by the end of it your arms are trembling. The head cook arrives and immediately starts issuing orders. He's in a foul mood, which is his default state. He inspects the fire, grunts, and tells you it's not hot enough. You add more wood and blow on it some more, even though your lungs are already protesting. He checks the ingredients laid out from the previous day and finds fault with something. Maybe the vegetables weren't cleaned properly, or the meat wasn't stored correctly. He berates you, his voice sharp and cutting, and you nod and apologize even though you're not sure what you did wrong. The other cooks start arriving, and the kitchen slowly comes to life. There's a pecking order, and you're somewhere in the middle. You defer to those above you and boss around those below you, and everyone is irritable because nobody's had enough sleep or food. The scullery workers are already scrubbing pots from yesterday, their hands red and raw from the cold water and harsh ash. They look even more miserable than you feel, and you're grateful you're not at the very bottom of the hierarchy. Breakfast for the household is simple but still requires effort. Porridge for the servants, bread and honey for the master's table, maybe some fruit if it's in season. You stir a massive pot of porridge, the wooden spoon heavy in your hand. The porridge is made from barley or wheat, boiled with water until it's thick and gluey. It doesn't taste of much, but it's filling. You're allowed a bowl for yourself, and you eat it standing up, gulping it down quickly because there's no time to savour it. It's lukewarm and gritty, and it sits heavy in your stomach. The bread for the master's table is from yesterday's baking, and you have to check it for staleness. If it's too hard, you'll be blamed. You slice it carefully, arrange it on a wooden platter, and drizzle it with honey from the big jar. The honey is thick and slow-moving in the morning cold, and you have to tilt the jar and wait for it to drip. Your hands get sticky, and you wipe them on your tunic, adding another layer to the collection of stains. Let's talk about the constant interruptions, because you can never just focus on one task. You're in the middle of chopping onions when the head cook barks at you to check the fire. You set down the knife and rush over, prodding the logs with an iron poker. Sparks fly up, and you jump back to avoid getting burned. The head cook is dissatisfied with something else, and sends you to fetch more olive oil from the storeroom. You hurry through the courtyard, your sandals slapping on the stone, and retrieve a heavy clay jar. By the time you get back, the onions have been sitting there, and the head cook is annoyed that you left them unattended. The storeroom is another source of stress. It's a dark, cool room where the household keeps its supplies. The air is musty and slightly damp, and there's a permanent smell of grain and aged wine. The shelves are packed with amphorae, sacks of flour, jars of oil and honey, and baskets of dried beans. Everything is heavy and awkward to move, and the lighting is terrible. You hold a small oil lamp in one hand while trying to lift a jar with the other, and it's a recipe for disaster. You've dropped things before, and the crash of breaking pottery echoes through the household. The steward comes running, furious, and you have to grovel and promise to be more careful. Let's talk about the rats in the storeroom, because they're even bolder there than in the kitchen. You see them scurrying along the shelves, their eyes glinting in the lamplight. They've chewed through sacks of grain, and there are little piles of droppings everywhere. You set traps, wooden contraptions with a spring mechanism, but the rats are clever. They take the bait and avoid the trap, or they trigger it and somehow escape. You've caught a few over the months, and disposing of them is unpleasant. You have to pick up the dead rat by the tail, trying not to look at its crushed body, and toss it outside for the dogs to eat. Let's talk about the sheer tedium of repetitive tasks. Chopping vegetables, for example. You chop leeks, onions, carrots, turnips, beets. You chop them every single day, often in the same quantities. The motion becomes automatic. Grab a vegetable, place it on the board, chop, 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 toss it into a bowl, grab the next one. Your mind goes numb, and you drift into a kind of trance. Sometimes you snap out of it and realize you've been chopping for half an hour and have no memory of it. The knife is dull, and you have to press hard. Your wrist aches and your fingers cramp around the handle. The turnips are the worst because they're hard and dense. You have to use real force to cut through them, and the knife sometimes slips. You've cut yourself more than once, a sharp sting followed by the sight of red welling up on your finger. You suck the wound and wrap it in a rag, and you keep working because there's no time to stop. The rag gets dirty and damp, and the cut stings every time you put your hand in water or handle something acidic. Let's talk about the meat in more graphic detail. because handling it is one of the less pleasant aspects of the job. When a butchered animal arrives, it's often in large, awkward pieces. A side of pork, a haunch of venison, or a whole lamb. The meat is heavy and unwieldy, and you have to wrestle it onto the table. Your hands get slippery from the fat, and the meat is cold to the touch, which makes your fingers ache. There's a faint metallic smell that you've learned to associate with fresh meat, but it's not always fresh. Sometimes it's been hanging for days and the smell is gamey and strong. Butchering the meat into usable portions requires a heavy cleaver. The cleaver is dull from years of use, and you have to hack rather than slice. You position the blade and bring it down hard, using your body weight. Sometimes it goes through cleanly, and sometimes it gets stuck in the bone. You have to wiggle it free, and the whole carcass shifts on the table. Your hands are covered in fat and little bits of tissue, and they're slippery. You wipe them on your tunic repeatedly, but it doesn't help much. The bones are the worst part. You have to chop through joints and separate limbs, and the cleaver sometimes bounces off the bone with a jarring impact that travels up your arm. Your shoulder aches from the repeated blows, and your hands are tired from gripping the handle so tightly. The bones splinter sometimes, and sharp fragments fly off. You've been hit in the face by a flying bone chip more than once, and it stings. The fat is useful for cooking, so you trim it off and save it in a clay pot. The fat is soft and white, and it has a slightly waxy texture. It smells bland and a bit greasy, and it coats your fingers. By the end of the butchering session, your hands are slick with fat, and they leave greasy prints on everything you touch. You try to scrub them clean, but the fat is stubborn. You use ash and sand, scrubbing hard until your skin is red and tender, and even then your hands still feel slightly greasy. Let's talk about the live animals that sometimes arrive. Chickens, rabbits, even the occasional piglet. They're brought in alive, squawking or squealing, and they have to be killed and prepared. You're not squeamish at this point because you've done it many times, but it's never pleasant. You grab a chicken by the legs and it flaps and struggles, its wings beating against your arms. You hold it firmly and carry it to the courtyard, where there's a chopping block. The actual act of killing is quick. You lay the chicken on the block, hold it down with one hand, and bring the cleaver down with the other. The head comes off cleanly if you do it right, and the body goes into spasms, flapping and kicking even though it's dead. You hold it over a bucket to catch the drips, and the warm liquid runs over your hands. The smell is strong and metallic, and it makes your stomach turn even though you're used to it. The body eventually stops twitching, and you carry it back to the kitchen for plucking. Plucking a chicken is tedious. You dip it in hot water to loosen the feathers, and then you start pulling them out. The feathers come out in clumps, and they stick to your wet hands. The smell of wet feathers is unpleasant, musty and slightly sour. You pull and pull, and your fingers get sore. The small pin feathers are the hardest because they're short and stubborn. You have to pick at them with your nails, and it takes forever. By the time you're done, the chicken is pale and pimply, and you're covered in wet feathers. They stick to your tunic, your arms, your hair. You shake yourself like a dog trying to dislodge them, but they cling stubbornly. Let's talk about the pig, because when a whole pig arrives, it's an event. The pig is massive and heavy, and it takes multiple people to carry it. It's already been killed and the hair singed off, but it still smells strongly of pig and burnt hair. The skin is thick and tough, and you have to use a sharp knife to cut through it. Inside, the meat is pale pink and marbled with fat. You work methodically, separating the different cuts. The legs, the belly, the loin, the ribs. Each piece is set aside for a different dish. The head is left on sometimes, and you have to deal with it. The eyes are cloudy and stare at nothing, and the mouth is slightly open, revealing yellow teeth. It's unsettling, and you try not to look at it too much. You chop it off at the neck, and it rolls slightly on the table. The tongue is a delicacy, apparently, and you have to cut it out. It's a thick, muscular organ, and cutting it free is awkward. The texture is slippery and unpleasant, and you're glad when it's done. Let's talk about the offal, because Romans ate everything: the liver, kidneys, heart, intestines. Nothing goes to waste. The offal smells strong and slightly unpleasant, a bit like iron and a bit like something earthier. You rinse the organs in cold water, trying to remove any residue. The intestines are the worst because they have to be cleaned thoroughly before they can be used for sausage casings. You squeeze out the contents, rinse them repeatedly, and turn them inside out to scrub the inner lining. It's a disgusting job, and the smell is foul. You gag more than once, but you keep going because it has to be done. The liver is large and slippery, a deep reddish-brown colour. You slice it thin for frying, and it has a dense, smooth texture. The kidneys are smaller and have a slightly different smell, stronger and more pungent. You have to trim away the fatty bits and the central core, and your fingers get coated in a thin layer of grease. Let's talk about the cauldrons in more detail, because they're central to your work. They're massive bronze or iron pots that can hold gallons of liquid. When they're full, they're impossibly heavy, and it takes 2 people to move them. The handles get scorching hot, even through a thick cloth, and you've burned your hands on them more times than you can count. The bronze develops a greenish patina over time, and you're supposed to scrub it off, but it always comes back. Stirring a cauldron is exhausting. You have a long wooden paddle, and you have to reach down into the pot and stir the contents, making sure nothing sticks to the bottom. The steam rises up and hits you in the face, and it's scalding. You turn your head away, but you still feel the heat. Your arm aches from the circular motion, and you switch arms when one gets too tired. The stew or soup bubbles and pops, sending little spatters up onto your arms. They sting, and you wipe them off quickly before they burn. Let's talk about the bread oven in more detail, because it's a beast. The oven is a big domed structure made of brick, and it has a small opening at the front. You light a fire inside and let it burn for hours until the bricks are heated through. The bricks absorb the heat and radiate it back, creating an even temperature for baking. But managing the fire is tricky. Too much wood, and it gets too hot. Too little, and it doesn't heat properly. You have to judge by experience, and even then you get it wrong sometimes. When the oven is ready, you rake out the burning wood and embers, leaving the oven empty and scorching hot. The heat that comes out of the opening is incredible. It feels like opening the door to a furnace, and you have to lean back to avoid getting your face burned. You use a long-handled peel to slide the loaves in, and the heat is so intense you can only hold your position for a few seconds before you have to step back. You slide in the loaves quickly, one after another, and then you shut the door. The door is a heavy iron plate, and it's hot to the touch even with a cloth. You drop it into place, sealing the oven, and then you wait. The bread bakes in the residual heat, and you can't open the door to check on it, because that would let out all the heat. You have to judge by time and by smell. The smell of baking bread fills the kitchen, rich and yeasty and comforting. It's one of the few smells that actually makes you feel good. Let's talk about the serving process, because it's another source of stress. The food has to be ready at exactly the right time, not too early, or it gets cold, not too late, or the master is kept waiting. The head cook coordinates everything, shouting instructions and checking dishes. You're rushing around, transferring food from pots to serving platters, garnishing with herbs, drizzling with oil. Your hands are shaking from the pressure and the heat, and you're terrified of dropping something. The platters are heavy, and you carry them to the serving area, where the waiters take over. The serving area is a small room between the kitchen and the dining room, and it's chaotic. Waiters are jostling for position, grabbing platters and rushing off. The steward is there, inspecting everything and making last-minute adjustments. He might decide that a platter isn't garnished elaborately enough, and he'll grab a handful of herbs and toss them on, ruining the arrangement you spent time creating. You bite your tongue and say nothing. The waiters come back with empty platters, and you breathe a sigh of relief. Empty means the guests enjoyed the food, but sometimes they come back with platters that still have food on them, and that's a bad sign. The head cook demands to know what was wrong. Was it overcooked, under-seasoned, the wrong temperature? The waiter shrugs, and the head cook glares at you as if it's your fault. You have no idea what went wrong, but you apologize anyway. Let's talk about the guests and their ridiculous demands. Romans of a certain class were obsessed with novelty and showing off. They wanted dishes that were elaborate and unusual, things their friends hadn't seen before. This means you're constantly being asked to make things you've never attempted. Stuffed peacock, for example. A whole peacock, roasted and then reassembled with its feathers still attached so it looks like it's alive. It's absurd and incredibly fiddly. You have to pluck the bird carefully, preserving the skin and feathers, roast it, and then reattach the feathers with little wires. The end result is impressive, but it takes hours, and the peacock doesn't even taste that good. It's dry and stringy, but the guests applaud because it looks spectacular. Another time, the master requests a dish with live birds hidden inside a pie. You bake a huge pie with a hollow center, and just before it's served, you cut a hole in the top and shove in a couple of small birds. When the master cuts into the pie, the birds fly out, and everyone is delighted. Meanwhile, you're in the kitchen, exhausted and resentful, wondering why anyone would think this is a good idea. The birds are terrified, and they make a mess in the dining room, but that's not your problem. Let's talk about the dormice again, because they deserve more attention. Romans fattened dormice in special clay jars, feeding them nuts and chestnuts until they were plump. Then they killed them and cooked them, usually stuffed with pork and spices. You're handed a basket of dead dormice, and they're small and furry like large mice. You have to skin them, which is delicate work. The skin is thin and tears easily, and you have to use a small, sharp knife. The process is time-consuming and unpleasant, and by the end your hands are cramping. Once skinned, the dormice look like tiny, naked creatures, and it's unsettling. You stuff them with the mince mixture, using your fingers to push it into the body cavity. Then you arrange them on a small baking tray and roast them. The smell is actually quite nice, savoury and nutty, but the sight of them is off-putting. They're served whole, and the guests eat them with their fingers, pulling off the little limbs and popping them into their mouths. You find it bizarre and slightly disturbing, but it's what the Romans like. Let's talk about the sauces, because they're a key part of Roman cooking, and they're a pain to make. Roman sauces are complex, involving multiple ingredients that have to be balanced carefully. A typical sauce might include garum, honey, vinegar, wine, herbs, and spices. You start by heating wine in a pan, reducing it down to concentrate the flavour. The wine hisses and steams, and the smell is sharp and acidic. You add honey, and it dissolves into the wine, sweetening it. Then you add garum, and the smell intensifies, becoming pungent and fishy. You chop herbs finely, crushing them in a mortar with spices. The spices release their aroma as you grind, and the smell is warm and fragrant. You add the herb mixture to the sauce, stirring constantly. The sauce has to be watched carefully because it can burn easily, and burnt sauce is ruined sauce. You taste it, adjusting the balance. Too sweet? Add more vinegar. Too salty? Add more honey. It's a process of trial and error, and you're never entirely sure you've got it right. The sauce is strained through a cloth to remove the solids, and you're left with a smooth liquid. Straining is awkward because the sauce is hot, and the cloth absorbs some of it. You gather the edges of the cloth and squeeze, and the sauce drips through into a bowl. The cloth is stained and will have to be washed, which is another chore for later. Let's talk about the salad dressings, because even simple salads require preparation. Roman dressings are usually a mixture of olive oil, vinegar and salt, sometimes with herbs or honey added. You pour the oil into a bowl, and it's thick and golden, with a slightly fruity smell. The vinegar is sharp and sour, and you add it carefully a little at a time, whisking to combine. The mixture emulsifies slightly, becoming creamy. You add a pinch of salt, maybe some chopped herbs, and taste. It's tangy and rich, and it transforms a simple salad into something more interesting. Let's talk about the pastries, because sweet dishes are part of the banquet too. Roman pastries are made with flour, oil, honey, and sometimes eggs. You mix the dough, kneading it until it's smooth. The dough is a bit oily and sticks to your hands. You roll it out thin, using a wooden rolling pin that's worn smooth from years of use. The dough is delicate and tears easily, and you have to patch it together. You cut the dough into shapes, maybe circles or rectangles, and fill them with a mixture of cheese and honey, or chopped dates and nuts. You fold the dough over the filling and press the edges to seal. The pastries are fried in hot oil, and you have to watch them carefully because they brown quickly. The oil spits and pops, and you use a long-handled spoon to turn them. When they're golden and crispy, you lift them out and drain them on a cloth. They're drizzled with more honey while they're still hot, and the honey soaks in, making them sticky and sweet. Let's talk about the wine preparation in more detail. Wine is stored in amphorae, and transferring it to serving jugs is a messy job. You tip the amphora carefully, and the wine glugs out. The amphora is heavy and awkward, and you have to brace it against your body. Wine spills, running down the side of the amphora and onto your hands. The floor becomes sticky and stained, and you have to mop it up later. The wine is often mixed with water, and the proportions are important. Too much wine and the guests get drunk too quickly. Too much water, and the wine is weak and tasteless. You pour wine and water into a large mixing bowl, stirring with a ladle. Sometimes spices are added, or honey to sweeten it. You taste the mixture, and it's sharp and slightly astringent, with the flavour of the spices coming through. In the winter, the wine is heated, and you use a bronze pot set over the fire. You add honey and spices like cinnamon, cloves, and maybe a bit of pepper. The mixture simmers, and the smell is wonderful, sweet and spicy. You have to stir constantly to prevent it from boiling, and the steam rises up, warm and fragrant. When it's ready, you pour it into jugs and send it out to the dining room. The guests appreciate the warm wine on a cold evening, and you feel a small sense of satisfaction. Let's talk about the storage of ingredients, because keeping things from spoiling is a constant challenge. In the summer, food goes off quickly, and you have to be vigilant. Meat is kept in the coolest part of the larder, but even there, it doesn't last long. You check it multiple times a day, sniffing to see if it's still good. The smell changes as it ages, becoming sharper and more pungent. You learn to judge by smell and by touch. If the meat feels slimy, it's gone off, and you have to dispose of it. Vegetables are stored in baskets, and you have to sort through them regularly, removing any that are rotting. A single bad onion can make the whole basket smell foul, and the rot spreads quickly. You pull out the bad ones and they're soft and mushy, collapsing in your hand. The smell is sharp and unpleasant, and it clings to your fingers. You toss them onto the compost heap, and flies immediately swarm over them. Grain is stored in big clay jars with lids, and you have to check for weevils. Weevils are tiny beetles that infest grain, and they're a constant problem. You pour out some grain and sift through it with your fingers, looking for the little brown bugs. If you find them, you have to decide whether the infestation is bad enough to throw out the whole batch. Usually, you just pick out the weevils and use the grain anyway. Waste is not acceptable, and the master won't pay for new grain if the old can be salvaged. Let's talk about the oil, because olive oil is used in huge quantities. It's stored in amphorae, and the oil is thick and golden. In the winter, it solidifies slightly, becoming cloudy and thick. You have to warm it by the fire to make it liquid again. The oil has a fruity, slightly bitter smell, and it's used for cooking, for dressings, and for preserving. You pour it liberally over dishes, and it adds richness and flavour, but it's also slippery and messy, and it gets everywhere. The amphorae are stored in a cool room, lined up against the walls. They're heavy and fragile, and you have to be careful when moving them. You've seen an amphora slip and shatter, and the oil spread across the floor in a huge puddle. It took hours to clean up, and the floor was slippery for days afterwards. The person who dropped it was punished, and you've been extra careful ever since. Let's talk about the vinegar, because it's another staple. Roman vinegar is strong and sour, made from wine that's gone off. It's stored in smaller jars, and the smell is sharp and acidic, making your nose wrinkle. Vinegar is used in dressings, in sauces, and for pickling. You pour it carefully because too much can ruin a dish, making it too sour. The fumes from the vinegar are strong, and they make your eyes water if you breathe in at the wrong moment. Pickling is a way of preserving vegetables, and you prepare big jars of pickled onions, cucumbers, and beets. You slice the vegetables, pack them into jars, and cover them with vinegar mixed with salt and herbs. The vinegar smell is overwhelming, and your hands reek of it for hours afterwards. The jars are sealed and stored, and the vegetables slowly pickle, developing a tangy flavour. Pickled vegetables are served as a side dish, and they add a sharp contrast to the richer meats. Let's talk about the herbs in more detail, because they're essential to Roman cooking. Fresh herbs are used when available, and dried herbs when they're not. You grow some herbs in the courtyard, small pots of rosemary, thyme, mint, and parsley. You water them when you remember, and they grow despite the neglect. When you need herbs, you go out and snip off a few sprigs. The smell is fresh and green, a brief respite from the kitchen's usual stenches. Drying herbs is simple. You tie them in bunches and hang them from hooks in the kitchen. They dry slowly, and the leaves become brittle. When you need dried herbs, you crumble them between your fingers, and they release a concentrated aroma. Dried rosemary is piney and resinous. Dried thyme is earthy and warm. You add them to stews and roasts, and they infuse the dishes with flavour. Let's talk about the pepper, because it's rare and precious. Pepper comes from far away, imported along trade routes, and it's expensive. The household has a small supply, kept in a locked box because it's valuable enough to steal. You're given access when it's needed, and you measure it out carefully, grinding it in a mortar. The peppercorns are hard and black, and they crack under the pestle, releasing a sharp, spicy aroma. The smell makes your nose tingle, and if you breathe in the dust, you sneeze uncontrollably. A pinch of pepper transforms a dish, adding heat and complexity. You use it sparingly, both because it's expensive and because too much can overpower other flavours. The master is particular about pepper, and he notices if it's missing from a dish. You've been reprimanded for underpeppering, and you've learned to be generous enough to satisfy him, but not so generous that you waste it. Let's talk about the salt, because it's another essential. Salt is used for seasoning and for preserving, and the household uses a lot of it. It comes in large blocks, greyish and coarse, and you have to grind it down to use it. You use a mortar and pestle, pounding the salt until it's fine. The grinding is repetitive and tiring, and the salt dust gets into the air, making you cough. Preserved meats are heavily salted, and they have to be soaked before cooking to remove some of the salt. You place the meat in a basin of water and leave it overnight. By morning, the water is cloudy and salty, and you drain it off and add fresh water. Sometimes you have to soak the meat for a full day, changing the water multiple times before it's palatable. Let's talk about the water supply again, because it affects everything you do. The well in the courtyard is the only source of water, and it's a communal resource. Everyone in the household uses it, and there's always competition for access. You have to wait your turn, standing in line with the other servants, and the wait can be frustrating when you're in a hurry. The well is deep, and hauling up the bucket is hard work. You've developed a technique, bracing your feet and pulling hand over hand, but it's still exhausting. The water is cold and clean, and it tastes faintly of stone. In the summer, it's refreshing, and you drink deeply when you get the chance. In the winter, it's icy, and it makes your teeth ache. Washing in cold water is unpleasant, and you do it as quickly as possible, splashing your face and hands and then drying off on your tunic. Let's talk about the few moments of camaraderie in the kitchen, because they make the job bearable. Despite the stress and the hierarchy, there are moments when you and the other cooks work together in harmony. You fall into a rhythm, chopping and stirring and tasting, and it feels almost satisfying. Someone makes a joke, and you all laugh, and for a moment, the misery lifts. There's a shared understanding among the kitchen staff. You all know how hard the work is, and you all resent the master and the steward and the endless demands. You don't talk about it openly, but it's there, an unspoken bond. When someone makes a mistake, the others cover for them, helping to fix it before the head cook notices. When someone's having a particularly bad day, the others pick up the slack. Let's talk about the brief interactions with the other servants in the household. You see them occasionally, passing in the courtyard or waiting at the well. There are the household cleaners, who scrub the floors and empty the chamber pots. There are the laundry workers, who wash the master's clothes. There are the gardeners, who tend the small courtyard garden. You exchange nods and brief greetings, but you don't really know them. Everyone is busy with their own work, and there's no time for socializing. Let's talk about the physical layout of the household, because it affects your daily routine. Roman households are built around a central courtyard, and the kitchen is in a separate building to reduce fire risk. This means you're constantly walking back and forth between the kitchen and the main house, carrying food, fetching supplies, and taking messages. The courtyard is open to the sky, and the weather affects you directly. In the rain, you get soaked. In the heat, the sun beats down on you. In the winter, the wind cuts through your thin tunic. The courtyard has a few functional features. There's the well, of course, which is the centre of activity. There's a small garden where herbs and a few vegetables grow. There's the chicken coop, smelling of droppings and straw. There's a storage shed where wood and tools are kept. And there's the latrine, tucked into a corner and avoided whenever possible. The courtyard is paved with stone, and the stones are uneven and worn. You've tripped more than once, and your shins are perpetually bruised. The main house is off limits to you most of the time. You're a kitchen servant, and your place is in the kitchen. You catch glimpses of the interior when you deliver food, and it's a different world. The floors are tiled with intricate mosaics, the walls are painted with colourful frescoes, and the furniture is elegant and expensive. It's a stark contrast to the grimy, functional kitchen where you spend your days. Let's talk about the master and his family in more detail, because they're the reason you're here. The master is a wealthy Roman citizen, probably a merchant or a minor official. He's obsessed with status and appearances, and his banquets are a way of showing off to his peers. He's middle-aged, portly, and has a loud, commanding voice. You've seen him a few times striding through the courtyard, and he never acknowledges you. You're invisible to him, just another servant. The master's wife is equally haughty. She's involved in managing the household, and she occasionally inspects the kitchen, checking that things are being done to her standards. She wrinkles her nose at the smell, makes a few critical comments, and then leaves. She's dressed in fine clothes, her hair elaborately styled, and she smells of perfume. The contrast between her and you is jarring, and it reinforces your low status. They have grown offspring who live in the household or visit frequently. The offspring are spoiled and demanding, and they treat the servants with casual disdain. They snap their fingers and expect immediate obedience, and they complain loudly if something isn't to their liking. You dislike them intensely, but you keep your thoughts to yourself. Let's talk about the guests who come to the banquets, because they're a source of stress. The guests are the master's friends, business associates, and social rivals. They're wealthy and cultured, and they have high expectations. They discuss philosophy and politics while they eat, showing off their knowledge. They critique the food, comparing it to other banquets they've attended. You hear snippets of their conversations through the waiters, and it's clear that they're judging everything. The pressure to impress is immense. The master's reputation depends on the quality of his banquets, and that means the food has to be exceptional. You're acutely aware that any mistake you make will reflect badly on the master, and you'll be the one who suffers the consequences. It's a lot of responsibility for someone who's exhausted and underfed. Let's talk about the entertainment at the banquets, because it's not just about food. The master hires musicians, dancers, and sometimes performers to entertain his guests. You hear the music drifting from the dining room, the sound of flutes and lyres, and sometimes singing. It's pleasant, and you pause for a moment to listen, but then the head cook barks at you, and you snap back to work. The performers are other servants or hired professionals, and they have their own struggles. The musicians have to play for hours and their fingers cramp. The dancers have to perform elaborate routines in tight spaces, and they're often groped by drunken guests. It's not an easy life, and you're glad you're in the kitchen and not on display. Let's talk about the master's expectations regarding portion sizes, because Romans ate enormous amounts at banquets. A single guest might consume multiple courses, each with several dishes, and they're expected to eat until they're stuffed. You prepare quantities that seem absurd, and yet it's all consumed. The guests recline on couches, eating and drinking for hours, and they sometimes make themselves sick from overindulgence. You find it wasteful and disgusting, but it's not your place to judge. The leftovers from the banquet are distributed among the servants, and this is one of the few perks of the job. You get to eat food that's far better than your usual fare, and you look forward to it. The leftovers are cold and picked over, but they're still delicious compared to your daily porridge and beans. You eat greedily, savouring the flavours, and for a brief moment, you feel almost human. Let's talk about the diseases and ailments that are common in the kitchen. The constant exposure to smoke affects your lungs, and you develop a chronic cough that never goes away. You cough up grey phlegm in the mornings, and your chest feels tight. The heat and the hard work make you sweat constantly, and you're always slightly dehydrated. Your skin is dry and flaky, and you develop rashes in the folds of your body where sweat and grime accumulate. Your teeth are a problem too. The coarse bread and the lack of dental care mean that your teeth are decaying. You have a persistent toothache in one of your back molars, and it throbs constantly. Chewing on that side is painful, so you favor the other side, and your jaw aches from the uneven strain. You dream of having the tooth pulled, but there's no dentist, and the pain would be excruciating. So you endure it, chewing carefully and hoping it doesn't get worse. Your feet are a mess. The constant standing on hard tile combined with the thin sandals has given you calluses and corns. The calluses crack and bleed, and the cracks are painful. You develop blisters that burst and then harden into more calluses. Your toenails are thick and yellowed, and they sometimes fall off. You've lost more than one toenail, and the exposed skin underneath is tender and sore. Let's talk about the lack of medical care, because if you get seriously ill, you're on your own. There are doctors in Rome, but they're expensive, and they serve the wealthy. Servants don't get medical attention unless they're valuable enough to warrant it. If you have a fever or an injury, you're expected to work through it, unless you're literally unable to stand. If you can't work, you're a burden, and burdens are not tolerated. There are folk remedies that the servants use, passed down through generations. Willow bark tea for pain, honey for wounds, garlic for infections. You try these remedies when you're sick, and sometimes they help, and sometimes they don't. Mostly, you just wait for your body to heal itself, and you hope it does before the master decides you're not worth keeping. Let's talk about the concept of time, because you have no control over it. You wake when you're told to wake, you work when you're told to work, and you sleep when you're allowed to sleep. There are no clocks, no watches, no precise measurement of time. You judge the time of day by the position of the sun and by the routine of the household. Morning is when the sun rises. Midday is when it's directly overhead. Evening is when it sets. The seasons change, and the days get longer or shorter, but your workload stays the same. The lack of personal time is stifling. You have no hobbies, no leisure activities, no time to yourself. Every waking moment is spent working or preparing to work. Sleep is the only escape, and even that is interrupted by aches and pains and the snoring of the other servants in your room. Let's talk about the relationship between the kitchen staff and the other servants, because there's a definite hierarchy even among the enslaved and the freedmen. The kitchen staff are considered relatively skilled, which gives you a slightly higher status than the cleaners or the laundry workers. But you're still far below the steward, the personal attendants, and the tutors if the family has them. Everyone jockeys for position, trying to maintain their status or climb higher, and it creates a tense atmosphere. The personal attendants, who dress the master and his family and attend to their needs, look down on you. They're closer to the family, and they have access to better clothes and occasionally gifts. They smell better because they're not working in a smoky kitchen all day, and they carry themselves with a certain superiority. You resent them, but you also envy them. Their work is less physically demanding, even if it's emotionally draining to be constantly at someone's beck and call. The steward is the most powerful servant, and he rules the household staff with an iron fist. He's a freedman, and he's been with the family for decades. He's cold, efficient, and utterly unsympathetic. He sees the servants as tools, and if a tool breaks, it's replaced. You fear him more than you fear the master, because he has direct control over your daily life. A word from him can get you beaten, or have your rations reduced, or see you sold to another household. Let's talk about the punishments, because they're a constant threat. If you make a serious mistake, you might be beaten. The head cook has a stick, and he uses it liberally. A blow across the shoulders or the back of the legs is painful and humiliating. You've been hit more than once, and the memory of the sharp sting and the burning shame stays with you. You learn to be careful, to double-check everything, to avoid giving anyone a reason to punish you. Reduced rations are another punishment. If the master is displeased, the steward might cut your food allowance. You're already hungry most of the time, and eating even less is torture. Your stomach cramps, your energy plummets, and you struggle to keep up with the work. You become weaker and more prone to mistakes, which leads to more punishment. It's a vicious cycle. The threat of being sold is the worst. If you're enslaved, the master can sell you to another household at any time. You might be sent somewhere worse, with a crueler master and harder work. The uncertainty is terrifying, and it keeps you compliant. You do what you're told, you keep your head down, and you try not to draw attention to yourself. Let's talk about the rare moments of kindness, because they do happen, and they mean everything. One of the other cooks might share a bit of extra food with you when you're particularly hungry. The head cook might nod approvingly when you've done something well, and that tiny bit of recognition lifts your spirits. A waiter might pass on a genuine compliment from a guest, and you feel a flush of pride. These moments are rare, and they're all the more precious because of it. They remind you that you're human, that your work matters, and that you're not entirely alone. You cling to these moments, replaying them in your mind when the work gets particularly hard. Let's talk about the sense of time passing, or rather, the lack of it. The days blur together into an endless repetition. You lose track of dates, of seasons, of how long you've been doing this job. 1 year becomes 2, becomes 5, and you're not sure anymore. You look at the older cooks, and you see your future, and it's bleak. They're worn down, their bodies broken, their spirits dulled. That's where you're headed, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Let's talk about the lack of education and opportunity. You're illiterate, and you'll stay that way. There's no time or opportunity to learn to read or write. You can count, because you have to measure ingredients, but that's the extent of your education. You're trapped in this role because you don't have the skills or the resources to do anything else. Even if you were freed tomorrow, what would you do? You're a cook, and that's all you know. Let's talk about the market in more detail, because when you're sent there, it's a whole different challenge. The market is a sprawling, chaotic space, filled with vendors selling everything from vegetables to pottery to livestock. The noise is deafening, a constant roar of voices haggling, animals bleating and carts rattling. The smell is intense, a mixture of fresh produce, spices, fish, meat and humanity. It's overwhelming, and you have to navigate through it with a clear head and a tight grip on your coins. The vendors are aggressive, calling out to you as you pass, trying to lure you to their stalls. They shout about the quality of their goods, the freshness of their produce, the fairness of their prices. You've learned to ignore most of it and head straight for the vendors the household usually uses. Building a relationship with a vendor means slightly better prices and better quality, but you still have to haggle. Haggling is an art, and you're not very good at it. You state your offer, the vendor counters with a higher price, and you go back and forth until you reach a compromise. The vendor knows you're a servant, and they know you don't have much leeway, so they don't give you the best deals. You do your best, and you hope it's enough. The fish stalls are particularly unpleasant. The fish are laid out on tables, and the smell is strong and briny. Flies buzz around them, and the vendors swat at the flies with dirty cloths. You inspect the fish, checking the eyes and the gills, trying to determine freshness. The vendor assures you it's fresh, but you're skeptical. You buy what you're told to buy, and you carry it back in a woven basket. The basket smells of fish for days afterwards, and the smell transfers to your hands. The meat stalls are equally challenging. The butchers are rough men, covered in grime, and they hack at carcasses with large cleavers. The smell of raw meat is strong, and there are puddles of dark liquid on the ground. You state what you need, and the butcher cuts it for you, weighing it on a scale and wrapping it in cloth. You pay, and you carry the meat back, trying not to drip on yourself. Let's talk about the livestock section of the market, because sometimes you're sent to buy a live chicken or rabbit. The animals are kept in cramped cages, and they're distressed. The chickens squawk, the rabbits huddle in corners, and the smell of animal waste is strong. You point to the animal you want, the vendor pulls it out, and you inspect it. Is it healthy? Is it the right size? You make your decision, pay, and then you have to carry the animal back to the household. A chicken in a basket under your arm is awkward and heavy, and it protests the entire way. Let's talk about the fruit and vegetable stalls, because they're the most pleasant part of the market. The produce is colourful and fresh, and the smell is sweet. You buy apples, grapes, figs, melons, whatever is in season. You buy onions, leeks, carrots, beets, turnips. The vendors are friendlier here, and the transactions are quicker. You load everything into a large basket, and you carry it back, your arms aching from the weight. Let's talk about the spice merchants, because their stalls are fascinating. The spices are displayed in small bowls and sacks, and the colours are vibrant. Red paprika, yellow turmeric, black pepper, green cardamom. The smells are intense and exotic, and they make your nose tingle. Spices are expensive, and you're only sent to buy them on special occasions. You measure out the small quantities you're allowed, and the merchant wraps them in cloth. You tuck them carefully into your pouch because losing them would be a disaster. Let's talk about the evenings after the work is done, because they're the only time you have anything resembling personal time. The kitchen is cleaned, the fire is banked, and you're finally dismissed. You step out into the courtyard, and the cool evening air is a relief. The sun has set, and the sky is fading from blue to purple. The stars are starting to appear, and there's a brief moment of peace. You sit on a low wall in the courtyard, and you just breathe. Your body aches in every conceivable way. Your feet throb, your back is stiff, your hands are sore. You're exhausted beyond words, but you allow yourself a few minutes to just sit and do nothing. The other servants are doing the same, scattered around the courtyard, too tired to talk much. Someone might pass around a bit of wine, watered down and slightly sour, but it's a treat. You take a sip, and it warms your throat. The alcohol takes the edge off the pain and the exhaustion, and you feel slightly more human. You sit in companionable silence with the others, and there's a sense of shared suffering that's almost comforting. Eventually you have to move. Your body is stiffening up, and if you sit too long, it'll be even harder to get up. You shuffle to the well and splash some cold water on your face and hands. The water is shockingly cold, but it wakes you up a bit. You drink a few handfuls, and then you head to your room. The room is dark and stuffy, and it smells of sweat and straw. You feel your way to your mattress and collapse onto it. The straw crackles under your weight, and you shift, trying to find a comfortable position. It's impossible, of course. Your back aches no matter how you lie, and your feet throb. You wrap your thin blanket around yourself, and you close your eyes. Sleep doesn't come immediately. Your mind is still racing, replaying the day's events. Did you do everything right? Will tomorrow be as hard? How much longer can you keep this up? The questions swirl in your mind, and you try to quiet them. Eventually, exhaustion wins, and you drift off into a restless sleep. Let's talk about the dreams you have, because they're often strange and unsettling. You dream about the kitchen, about endless pots that need stirring, about fires that won't light, about the head cook yelling at you. You dream about running through the streets, trying to get somewhere but never arriving. You dream about food, mountains of it, and you're eating and eating, but you're still hungry. The dreams are vivid and exhausting, and you wake up feeling like you haven't rested at all. Sometimes you have pleasant dreams, though they're rare. You dream about being somewhere green and open, with fresh air and no smoke. You dream about eating a proper meal, something rich and satisfying. You dream about freedom, about walking away from the household and never looking back. But then you wake up and reality crashes down on you and the disappointment is crushing. Let's talk about the morning wake up again, because it comes too soon. It feels like you've only just fallen asleep when the head servant is shaking you awake. You groan and try to roll over, but he's persistent. You force your eyes open, and it's still dark outside. Your body protests as you sit up, and every muscle is stiff and sore. You drag yourself to your feet, and the cycle starts all over again. Let's talk about the cumulative effect of this lifestyle, because it's not sustainable in the long term. You're breaking down bit by bit. Your lungs are damaged from the smoke. Your joints are wearing out from the hard work. Your hands are a mess of scars and calluses. You're aging prematurely, and you can feel it. You're in your 20s or 30s, but you feel like you're 50. The older cooks are a cautionary tale. They're hunched and slow, their hands gnarled, their faces lined. They cough constantly, and they move with obvious pain. That's your future, and it's not far off. You wonder how much longer you can keep doing this, and you have no answer. Let's talk about the lack of hope, because it's one of the hardest things to bear. You can't see a way out of this life. If you're enslaved, freedom is a distant dream. If you're a freedman, you're still trapped by poverty and lack of options. You're stuck, and you'll probably be stuck for the rest of your life. The realization is depressing, and you try not to think about it too much. But sometimes, late at night, when you can't sleep because your back hurts too much, you let yourself imagine a different life. You imagine owning a small shop, selling food to grateful customers. You imagine having a clean tunic, a comfortable bed, enough food to eat. You imagine not being afraid all the time, not being in pain all the time. It's a fantasy, and you know it, but it's comforting. Let's talk about the small pleasures that keep you going, because they're all you have. The smell of fresh bread, the taste of a ripe fig, the brief coolness of the evening air, a moment of laughter with another cook. These tiny moments of joy are precious, and you hoard them in your memory. They're what make the misery bearable, just barely. Let's talk about the sense of identity, or lack thereof. You're a cook, and that's all you are. You don't have hobbies, you don't have interests outside of work, you don't have a life beyond the kitchen. Your identity is entirely bound up in your job, and that's stifling. You're not a person with dreams and desires. You're a tool, a means to an end. The master's meals are what matter, not you. Let's talk about the resentment that builds up over time. You resent the master for his wealth and his indifference. You resent the guests for their gluttony and their casual cruelty. You resent the head cook for his harshness, the steward for his coldness, even the other servants for their petty rivalries. The resentment festers, and it turns into a kind of low-level anger that you carry with you always. But you can't express it, so it just sits there, poisoning your thoughts. Let's talk about the occasional thoughts of escape, because they cross your mind. What if you just walked away? What if you left the household and disappeared into the city? But where would you go? You have no money, no connections, no skills beyond cooking. You'd be destitute, begging on the streets, and that's arguably worse than this. So you stay, because at least here you have food and shelter, however meagre. Let's talk about the rare moments when you see the master's family interacting, and you get a glimpse of their lives. They're not happy either, despite their wealth. The master is stressed about business. The wife is concerned about social standing. The offspring are bored and restless. They have their own problems, and in a strange way that makes you feel slightly better. Money doesn't solve everything, and even the wealthy have their miseries, but at least they have full stomachs and soft beds, so their miseries are a lot more bearable than yours. Let's talk about the religious festivals, because they punctuate the year and give you a sense of time passing. The Romans have many gods, and there are frequent festivals to honor them. On these days, the household makes offerings, and there's a festive atmosphere. The master might give the servants a bit of extra food or a few coins, and it's a welcome break from the routine. The festivals also mean extra work because the master hosts larger banquets. You spend days preparing, and the actual festival day is exhausting. But there's a sense of occasion, and the other servants are in better moods, and that makes it more bearable. You get to eat better food from the leftovers, and you have a brief moment of feeling like you're part of something, even if it's just the lowest rung. Let's talk about what would happen if you actually tried to do this job as a modern person, because it would be an unmitigated disaster. You'd walk into that kitchen on your first day, and within an hour you'd be ready to quit. The smoke would have you coughing and wheezing, your eyes streaming with tears. You'd try to light the fire, and you'd fail repeatedly because you've never had to coax a fire to life with damp wood and your own breath. Your lungs would burn, your face would be covered in ash, and you'd be wondering what on earth you'd got yourself into. The heat would be unbearable. You're used to air conditioning, to being able to regulate your environment. The kitchen would feel like stepping into an oven, and you wouldn't be able to escape. Within the first hour, you'd be drenched in sweat, your clothes clinging to you, and you'd be desperately looking for a cold drink or a fan. Neither exists. You'd have to fetch water from the well, hauling it up in a heavy bucket, and your arms would be shaking from the effort. You'd spill half of it on the way back, and the head cook would yell at you. The tools would frustrate you immediately. The knives are dull, the pots are heavy, and nothing works the way you expect. You'd try to chop an onion, and the knife would slip and you'd nearly cut yourself. You'd try to lift a full cauldron, and you'd realize it weighs more than you can comfortably manage. You'd burn your hands on hot pot handles, and you'd yelp and drop things, and the head cook would be furious. The smell would be overwhelming. The garum alone would have you gagging, and that's before you factor in the smoke, the raw meat, the unwashed bodies, and the general mustiness of the place. You'd be breathing through your mouth, trying not to inhale too deeply, and you'd still feel nauseous. The thought of eating anything prepared in this environment would turn your stomach. The work pace would break you. You're used to taking breaks, to having weekends off, to working a reasonable number of hours. Here, you'd be on your feet for 12 hours or more, with no breaks, no sitting down, no respite. Your feet would start to hurt within the first hour, and by midday, you'd be limping. Your back would ache from all the bending and lifting, and you'd be desperately looking for somewhere to sit. There isn't anywhere. You'd have to keep standing, keep working, and your body would be screaming at you. The food you'd have to prepare would baffle you. Dormice? Garum in everything? Whole fish that you have to gut and scale yourself? You'd be out of your depth immediately. You'd have no idea how to judge when something is cooked without a thermometer, how to season without tasting constantly, how to manage multiple dishes over an open fire. You'd burn things, you'd undercook things, and the head cook would be increasingly angry with you. The lack of modern conveniences would drive you mad. No running water, no refrigeration, no electric stove, no timer, no measuring cups. Everything is done by eye and by experience, and you have neither. You'd be constantly asking questions, and the other cooks would be too busy to help you. You'd make mistakes, and you'd be punished for them, and you'd realize that this is not a forgiving environment. The social dynamics would be alien to you. You're used to a degree of equality, to being treated with basic respect. Here, you're a servant, and you're treated as such. The head cook barks orders at you, the steward looks down on you, and the master doesn't even see you as a person. You'd be shocked and hurt by the casual cruelty, and you'd struggle to accept your low status. You'd want to argue, to assert yourself, but you'd quickly learn that doing so only makes things worse. The physical discomfort would be constant. The heat, the smoke, the aching muscles, the blistered feet, the burned hands. You'd be in pain all the time, and there'd be no relief. You can't take a painkiller. You can't have a hot bath to soothe your muscles. You can't put your feet up and rest. You'd have to keep working through the pain, and it would wear you down incredibly quickly. The hunger would gnaw at you. You're used to eating whenever you want, to having a full stomach. Here, you'd be given small portions of bland food, and you'd be hungry most of the time. You'd be surrounded by delicious-smelling dishes that you've prepared, and you wouldn't be allowed to eat them. The frustration and the hunger would combine, and you'd be miserable. The sleep deprivation would finish you off. You'd be woken before dawn, you'd work all day, and you'd collapse into bed exhausted. But the bed would be a straw mattress that's lumpy and uncomfortable, and you'd be sharing a room with 3 other people who snore and shift and keep you awake. You'd get maybe 5 or 6 hours of broken sleep, and then you'd be dragged out of bed to start all over again. Within a few days, you'd be a zombie, barely able to function. The lack of hope would be the final straw. You'd realize that this isn't a temporary situation, that there's no end in sight. You'd be trapped in this job, day after day, with no prospect of improvement. The realization would be crushing, and you'd feel despair settling over you. You'd understand why the other servants are so resigned, so beaten down, because there's no way out, and fighting against it only makes you more miserable. You'd probably quit after a day if you were allowed to, but you're not allowed to. You're a servant, and you work until you're told you can stop. So you'd endure, miserably, counting down the hours until you could escape. And if you had to do this for weeks, months, years, you'd be a shell of your former self, worn down by the relentless grind of the work. Let's be honest about the reality of this job. It's brutal, it's thankless, and it's soul-destroying. The Roman cook worked in conditions that would be considered inhumane by modern standards. The heat, the smoke, the long hours, the physical labor, the lack of breaks, the poor food, the constant threat of punishment. It's a job that breaks you down, physically and mentally, and there's no reward at the end. You create beautiful food for other people to enjoy, and you get nothing in return except the bare minimum to keep you alive and working. The modern world, for all its faults, is vastly better. You have appliances that make cooking easier. You have access to fresh ingredients year-round. You have labor laws that protect you. You have the freedom to quit if you're unhappy. You have running water, electricity, and refrigeration. You have weekends, holidays, and sick leave. You have a degree of control over your own life that a Roman cook could never have imagined. So the next time you're in your kitchen, frustrated because dinner is taking too long or the recipe isn't working out, take a moment to appreciate what you have. You have a stove that you can control with the turn of a dial. You have a refrigerator that keeps your food fresh. You have clean water at the turn of a tap. You have sharp knives and effective tools. You have the freedom to stop and rest whenever you need to. You wouldn't last as a Roman cook, and that's not a failing on your part. It's a recognition that the job was impossibly hard, and the people who did it were tougher than we can imagine. They endured conditions that would break most modern people, and they did it day after day, year after year. They deserve respect for their resilience, even if they were never given any in their own time. The Roman cook's life was one of unrelenting hardship, and it's a reminder of how far we've come. We have it easy by comparison, and we should be grateful for that. The smoke-filled kitchen, the scorching heat, the dull knives, the heavy pots, the garum, the dormice, the endless hours of standing and stirring and chopping. It's all in the past, and it's staying there. You wouldn't last a week, and honestly, you'd be smart not to even try.